The Earth has always been an excellent listener. Long before there were forests or oceans or skies filled with birds, the Earth was listening. It listened to quiet thoughts, to patient dreams, to ideas that required millions of years to become mountains. You see, many people believe that mountains are simply pushed upward by enormous forces deep beneath the ground. That explanation isn't entirely wrong. It simply leaves out the listening. Every mountain begins as a quiet conversation between the earth and a single stone. No one knows exactly what is said. The stones have always been far too polite to repeat it. Over time, that conversation grows. The stone finds another, then another, and another. Eventually, they decide they should remain together. That's how mountains begin. Some mountains grow quickly. Others prefer to think about it for several million years. Geologists generally consider both approaches perfectly respectable. Good evening, and welcome to Soft Spoken Mike. Whether you're listening to enjoy a quiet evening, to relax after a long day, or perhaps hoping to drift off to sleep, I hope you'll find a little peace during our time together. If these quiet lectures help you unwind, I'd really appreciate it if you'd give this video a like, subscribe if you haven't already. And if you're comfortable, say hello in the comments. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what other subjects you'd enjoy exploring together. Now, where were we? Yes. The mountains were just beginning to listen. One of the first things every beginning geologist learns is that not all rocks are awake at the same time. This often surprises new students, not because the idea is unusual, but because it's so easy to overlook. Most rocks prefer the early morning, just before sunrise, when the world is especially quiet. Granite is usually awake first. It's always been rather dependable in that regard. Granite enjoys predictable mornings, predictable weather, and predictable centuries. Sandstone takes a little longer. It likes to listen before saying very much. That's one reason it remembers so many stories. Every grain has traveled. Every grain has seen something different. When enough grains decide to rest together, their memories slowly become the rock itself. Quartz is perhaps the easiest mineral to recognize, not because of the way it looks, although it is quite handsome. No, experienced geologists recognize quartz because it always seems to be listening to something very far away. No one knows exactly what quartz hears. There have been many theories, none particularly convincing. Quartz has always been politely unwilling to explain. Rivers, however, are much less mysterious. Everyone knows that rivers collect stories as they travel from the mountains toward the sea. They gather little pieces of every place they visit. A smooth pebble might remember 1,000 bends in a river. A larger stone may remember an entire mountain that no longer exists. This is why it is considered good manners to pick up a pebble for only a little while. You're welcome to admire it, to appreciate its colors, its weight, its shape. But eventually, it should be returned to the place where its memories are most comfortable. You'll notice that experienced geologists rarely hurry. There are several reasons for this. The first is simple. The Earth has never hurried for anyone. The second is perhaps even more important. If you walk too quickly, the smaller stones don't have enough time to introduce themselves, and it would be a terrible shame to miss such good company. So, the next time you find yourself walking along a quiet trail or beside a peaceful stream, remember to slow down. Not because the Earth is difficult to understand, simply because it speaks very, very softly. Of all the subjects a geologist studies, perhaps the most difficult to understand is time. Not the sort of time measured by clocks or calendars or the changing of the seasons. Those are perfectly useful for people. The Earth has simply never developed much of an interest in them. Instead, the Earth keeps its own quiet calendar. A calendar written not in days or months, but in moments of becoming. The first leaf to fall at the beginning of autumn. The last snowflake to disappear from a mountain. The first pebble to notice that a stream has changed its song. Those are the dates the earth remembers. Every mountain keeps time a little differently. Young mountains are eager. They spend their early years looking upward, wondering how high they might someday become. Older mountains become quieter, not because they have less to say, quite the opposite. They've simply learned that silence is often the most comfortable place to keep a very old story. This is why the oldest mountains are often the gentlest. They've had millions of years to smooth away everything except what truly mattered. Pebbles measure time differently still. They don't count years. They count journeys. A pebble that has crossed 3 rivers is considered quite well traveled. One that has crossed an ocean is almost always a wonderful storyteller. It's generally believed that every beach contains at least one pebble that has seen the world from beginning to end. No one knows which pebble it is. The pebble has never felt the need to mention it. This is one reason that experienced geologists sometimes sit very quietly beside rivers or on lonely hillsides. From a distance, it may appear that they're doing nothing at all. But appearances have always been a little unreliable. In truth, they're waiting for the earth to finish a sentence. The earth never minds being interrupted. It simply starts again where it left off, which is fortunate because its stories have always been far too beautiful to tell only once. And if you listen long enough, you may begin to notice that the world has never been in quite as much of a hurry as we imagined. If mountains are the earth's great storytellers, then weather is its most patient editor. Every breeze makes a suggestion. Every raindrop offers a gentle correction. Every snowfall adds another quiet thought. The mountains listen to all of them. This is why no mountain ever looks quite the same from one century to the next. The weather is always revising the landscape. Rain has a particularly careful nature. It never rushes its work. It simply returns again and again. A single shower changes very little. 1,000 begin to leave their mark. 1,000,000 may persuade an entire hillside to become something new. Wind has a different personality. It enjoys long conversations, especially with cliffs. No one has ever heard those conversations. The wind speaks far too softly, but every now and then a cliff changes its shape ever so slightly, and geologists simply nod. The discussion must have gone well. Snow is perhaps the quietest of all. It asks very little of the world, only a place to rest. For a while, everything becomes a little quieter. Even the stones seem to appreciate the stillness. When spring arrives, the snow always knows when it's time to leave. It has never been known to overstay its welcome. The streams are always grateful to see it again. There is one kind of weather that young geologists often misunderstand: fog. Many people think that fog hides the landscape. That isn't quite right. Fog simply gives the mountains a little privacy. After all, even very old mountains sometimes appreciate a quiet morning to gather their thoughts. Experienced geologists have always respected that. They simply wait until the fog is ready to introduce the landscape once again. Patience, you may have noticed, is a rather important part of geology. Not because the earth expects it, but because beautiful things have always preferred to arrive in their own good time. And the earth has always believed that anything worth becoming is worth becoming slowly. Before long, every student of geology discovers that rocks are never alone. Within every rock live its minerals, not crowded, not competing, simply sharing the same quiet home. Minerals are remarkably well organized. They've always had a fondness for patterns. Each one knows exactly where it belongs, not because anyone told it, but because it remembers. Quartz, as we've already learned, is an excellent listener. It also happens to be a wonderful keeper of morning light. If you've ever noticed the first rays of sunrise sparkling across a hillside, there's an excellent chance that quartz had something to do with it. It has always been rather generous with sunlight. Feldspar is different, very dependable, very steady, the sort of mineral that quietly arrives before anyone else and stays until the work is finished. Entire mountain ranges have been known to rest comfortably upon feldspar without giving it a second thought. Feldspar has never seemed to mind. Then there is mica. Mica has always enjoyed collecting small pieces of light. Not all of it, just enough to remind the world that even shadows can sparkle. Some people believe that crystals grow. Geologists know that isn't the whole story. Crystals are actually very patient problem solvers. Given enough time, they quietly consider every possible way to fit together. Eventually, they agree upon a pattern, and once they've reached a decision, they rarely change their minds. It's one reason crystals have always been admired for their symmetry. Agreement looks remarkably beautiful, especially when everyone is listening to one another. This is also why experienced geologists are careful when they discover a crystal still deciding what shape it wishes to become. Interrupting such an important conversation has always been considered rather impolite. Most crystals reach their decisions without difficulty. A few simply require a little more quiet. Fortunately, the Earth has always had plenty of that. Perhaps that's why the most beautiful crystals are so often found in the deepest and quietest places. They've had all the time they needed to think. Sooner or later, every geologist finds a favorite river. Not because one river is better than another. Rivers would never encourage such comparisons. Each one simply tells a different story. Some rivers speak in long, gentle sentences. They wander through quiet valleys, taking their time to notice everything. Others are a little more adventurous. They hurry over waterfalls, around enormous boulders, and through narrow canyons. No matter how quickly a river appears to move, it never forgets to listen. That's considered one of the first rules of being a respectable river. As water flows across the land, it pauses every now and then to greet the stones. Most greetings are very brief. A quiet ripple, a gentle splash, a moment of shared silence. Occasionally, a river meets a stone with an especially interesting story. Those conversations can last for centuries. By the time they've finished, the stone is often a little smoother than before. Many people believe that rivers smooth stones through constant movement. That is partly true. But experienced geologists know that stories have a way of softening even the roughest edges. Every pebble you find beside a stream has been listening for a very long time. Some pebbles remember only one river. Others have traveled through so many that they occasionally pause to remember which story belongs to which current. This is perfectly understandable. After all, the older the journey, the more stories there are to carry. It's one reason older pebbles always seem so comfortable resting quietly in the sunlight. There is a place where every river becomes especially thoughtful. It happens just before the river meets the sea. The water slows. It grows remarkably calm, as though it's quietly remembering every mountain, every forest, every meadow, and every stone it met along the way. Only then does it continue toward the ocean. Geologists have always believed that this is simply good manners. One should never arrive with a lifetime of stories without first taking a moment to remember them. Perhaps that's why people have always found rivers so peaceful. Even if we don't realize it, there's something deeply comforting about sitting beside a friend who knows how to listen. And rivers have always been very good at listening. Before long, every river finds a forest. Some forests arrive quite unexpectedly. Others take centuries to decide where they belong. The earth has always been very patient with forests. It understands that growing is an important decision. People often think that trees grow upward. Experienced geologists know that isn't the whole story. Long before a tree reaches toward the sky, it spends a very long time getting acquainted with the ground. Its roots wander quietly through the soil. They introduce themselves to stones, to pebbles, to patient layers of earth. The oldest stones are always happy to make room. They've been expecting the trees for quite some time. Every forest has its own favorite mountain, not because the mountain is taller or older or more beautiful, simply because it tells the stories the forest most enjoys hearing. On quiet mornings, before the birds have begun their songs, the trees listen. The mountain never raises its voice. It has never needed to. The stories travel through the ground from stone to root, from root to trunk, from trunk to branch, until eventually the leaves know them too. This explains why forests always seem so comfortable being quiet. They are listening to conversations that began long before the first tree ever grew. There is a gentle understanding between trees and stones. The stones promise to remember everything. The trees promise to keep reaching toward the light. Neither promise has ever been broken. That's one reason old forests feel different from young ones. Young forests are curious. They ask many questions. Old forests already know most of the answers. They simply enjoy hearing them again. If you've ever walked through an ancient forest and felt that everything had become a little quieter, you were probably very close to one of those conversations. The forest wouldn't have minded your company. It only asks that visitors listen at least as much as they speak. After all, the earth has always believed that the best stories are shared between good listeners. Eventually, every river that travels far enough will begin to hear the ocean. At first, it's barely noticeable, a distant rhythm, a quiet sound somewhere beyond the hills. But as the river moves closer, the sound becomes clearer. The ocean has always been considered the greatest collector of stories on earth. Every river eventually brings something to the sea. A little sand, a little stone, a little memory of the mountains from which it came. The ocean accepts all of them. Large stories, small stories, old stories, stories that haven't quite decided how they end. There is room for all of them in the sea. This is why the ocean sometimes sounds as though it is whispering thousands of things at once. It is. Most of those stories are far too old for us to understand, but the stones understand them perfectly. Along the shore, the ocean spends much of its time sorting through its collection. A wave brings a handful of pebbles onto the beach. Then another wave carries some of them away again. The ocean has never been particularly good at deciding where everything should go. Fortunately, the pebbles are patient. They don't mind being rearranged. Sand is a little different. Every grain of sand was once part of something larger. Perhaps a cliff. Perhaps a mountain, perhaps a stone that spent 1,000,000 years beside a quiet river. Eventually, after enough wind, water, travel, and time, it became small enough to rest upon a beach. There, it joins countless others that have completed journeys of their own. This is why geologists never describe a beach as empty, even when there isn't another person for miles. A beach is filled with travelers, millions and millions of them resting side by side. And then there are the islands. The ocean surrounds them. The earth holds them, and the islands remain quietly between the two. Some islands are young. They rise from the sea with curiosity about the world above the water. Others are very old. They've spent so many years listening to the waves that they rarely have much left to ask. They simply sit beneath the sky and listen to the ocean, remembering. Perhaps that's what the ocean has been trying to tell us all along. Every wave travels toward the shore. Every wave returns to the sea. And somewhere between the arriving and the leaving, another story finds a place to rest. As evening settles over the landscape, geology becomes a little quieter. Not because the earth has stopped what it's doing. The earth never really stops. It simply prefers to do certain things after dark. Mountains, for example, use the evening to settle. After spending an entire day holding up the horizon, they appreciate a little quiet as the last of the sunlight disappears behind them. The mountains begin to relax very slowly, of course. Mountains do almost everything very slowly. The stones settle too. During the day, they've listened to footsteps, to birds, to wind moving through the trees. At night, there is less to hear. This gives the stones an opportunity to sort through everything they've learned. Most stones are very good at remembering, but even the best memory occasionally needs a little organizing. Rivers continue their journeys through the darkness. They don't need the sunlight to know where they're going. A river remembers every turn it has ever taken. Occasionally, it chooses a new one, but rivers have always believed that changing your mind is simply another way of continuing the journey. Deep inside the forests, the roots are still awake. Above them, the trees may appear perfectly still, but beneath the soil, quiet conversations continue. Roots speak to stones. Stones speak to the earth. And the earth, as always, listens. On clear nights, the oldest mountains sometimes look upward. They've been watching the same stars for longer than anyone can remember. The stars have changed. The mountains have changed. And yet, they continue to meet every night as though nothing has changed at all. Geologists have never been entirely certain what mountains think about when they look at the stars. Perhaps they remember when they were younger. Perhaps they wonder how much longer the stars intend to stay. Or perhaps they simply enjoy the view. There doesn't always need to be a reason. And as the night grows deeper, the world becomes quieter still. The wind softens. The forests rest. The rivers continue on their way. And beneath all of it, the earth keeps listening patiently, quietly, as it has for longer than anyone can remember, and as it will long after the rest of the world has fallen asleep. There comes a certain point in every night when even the landscape seems to grow tired. The mountains become only shadows. The forests become quiet shapes beneath the sky, and the rivers continue their journeys without needing anyone to watch. This is one of the Earth's favorite times. There is nothing that needs to be done, nothing that needs to be hurried, nothing that needs to be decided right away. The stones understand this better than almost anyone. A stone has never worried about tomorrow. Tomorrow will arrive when it arrives, and when it does, the stone will still be there. Perhaps a little warmer in the morning sun. Perhaps a little smoother after the rain. Perhaps resting a few inches farther downstream, but still a stone. Geologists have spent many years trying to understand this remarkable sense of calm. Some believe it comes from patience. Others believe it comes from memory. After all, when you've already watched a mountain rise, a river change direction, and an ocean come and go, it becomes rather difficult to worry about Tuesday. The stones have never explained which theory is correct. Perhaps they don't know, or perhaps they simply don't think the question is particularly important. There are some questions the Earth prefers to leave unanswered, not because the answers are secret, but because an unanswered question can be a very pleasant thing to carry with you. You don't have to solve it. You don't have to understand it. You can simply let it wander for a while, like a river finding its way through a quiet valley. And perhaps that's enough for tonight. To know that somewhere a river is still moving, a mountain is still listening, a forest is still resting upon the patient earth, and somewhere beside a quiet stream there is a small, smooth pebble that has traveled farther than anyone will ever know. It has no place it needs to be, no schedule it needs to keep, no reason to hurry. For now, it can simply rest and listen to the river passing quietly by. And perhaps after spending this time with the earth, you've begun to notice something you hadn't noticed before. The world is rarely as silent as it seems. There are conversations everywhere between rivers and stones, between roots and soil, between mountains and weather, between beaches and the sea. Most of these conversations are far too quiet for us to hear. But that doesn't mean we can't listen. Listening has always been about more than sound. Sometimes it's simply being still long enough to notice what was already there. A breeze moving through leaves, water passing over stones, rain against the ground, or perhaps nothing at all. Nothing can be surprisingly peaceful when you give it enough time. The oldest geologists understand this very well. They know that sometimes the best way to understand a mountain is not to climb it. Sometimes it's better to sit a little distance away and let the mountain come to you. Not literally, of course. Mountains are extremely slow walkers, but eventually, if you remain quiet, you begin to notice little things. The way the shadows move across its slopes, the way clouds gather around its summit, the way a stream appears from somewhere you cannot see. And slowly, the mountain begins to introduce itself. It may take a few minutes. It may take an afternoon. Occasionally, a particularly reserved mountain requires several centuries. There is no need to rush it. The mountain will speak when it's ready. Perhaps the same is true of the earth itself. We spend so much time walking across it, building upon it, traveling from one place to another, and all the while, beneath us, the earth continues its quiet conversation with the stones, with the rivers, with the roots, with the mountains, and perhaps every now and then with us. After all, we've spent a great deal of time talking tonight about how the earth listens. Perhaps while we've been listening to the earth has been quietly listening to us. And if so, there's really nothing we need to say. We can simply be quiet for a little while and listen together. And now, I think we've listened for long enough. For one evening, we've wandered the side rivers. We've rested beneath mountains. We've listened to forests and stones and the quiet conversations beneath our feet. And somewhere along the way, perhaps the world became just a little quieter. If you're still awake, I hope you're feeling a little calmer than when we began. And if you've already drifted off to sleep, then I'm glad our time together helped you find your way there. If you enjoyed our quiet time together and you'd like to join me for another lecture, I'd really appreciate it if you'd give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And if you're still awake enough to type a few words. Say hello in the comments. Let me know where you're listening from, and if there's another subject you'd like to quietly explore together. I'd love to hear your ideas. But there's no need to do any of that right now. The comments will still be there tomorrow. For now, you can simply rest. The rivers will continue their journeys. The forests will continue their quiet conversations. The mountains will continue watching the stars, and the stones will remember everything until morning. Thank you for spending this quiet time with me, wherever you happen to be. I hope the rest of your evening is peaceful, and if you're listening as you drift off to sleep, then there's nothing else you need to do. Just rest and let the earth do the listening for a while. Good night, and sleep well.